Hi, can you hear
Hi.
me?
Yes.
Hi, Lauren.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am great. It is so nice to meet you over over Instagram Live.
Oh
This is
dear.
awesome. So let's get started with this interview. And okay, so I'm gonna do my intro as I usually do. Hello, everyone out there. I am Dr. Lauren. I run Think Dyslexia, the account on Instagram. I'm also on YouTube. I have a website. This is my first live on this account because those of you
Amazing.
those of you who were following me before, I was on another account that got locked and shut down and all of that goodness. So I
Oh,
restarted this one, but it's actually been going really well. So I'm super excited to be back live and having these discussions. And Van, you are you're a general practitioner, correct?
yes. A medical doctor, general practitioner. Yes, family medicine.
Family medicine. And so today's topic for all of you out there, because I see you're joining in, we're really going to focus in about what Van's experience was growing up. And I'm not going to tell your story. I'm going to let you tell, but want to hear a little bit about what your experience was like um, being dyslexic, what it was like, what it was seen in the Asian community, and really when was your experience of knowing that you had dyslexia, your diagnoses, and then the last thing, what advice can you give to adults in the medical field?
Mm.
So let's get started with our interview. So let me get our first question out. So you were a Vietnamese boat refugee, as we
hmm
talked about before, traveling to the UK, and your background is Chinese as well. So can you speak more to this experience a little bit about your journey, especially being in the UK?
Mm. I don't remember much of sort of being a refugee. I do recall I was very, very young, must have been about 5 or something like that. And after the Vietnam War, the people who weren't indigenous Vietnamese were kicked out. So we were moved to Hong Kong for about a year, and then we came over to the UK on one of these boats. And I remember being very, very sick, and so sick I had to go back to Hong Kong while the boat carried on with the journey. And then I was sent back, and we caught up with the boat that my family was on, and arrived in the UK when I was very young. So, yeah, spoke very little English, obviously. And my mum's Vietnamese, my father's Chinese. So we were brought up where we spoke very broken Chinese and a bit of a mixture. So I just always felt out of place. And arriving in the UK with no English, felt very isolated, very few friends. Having recording in elementary school, primary school, going to English as a second language classes. And it alienated. I felt more alienated because we were taken out of the regular class for
Right.
these extra classes. So yeah, I think my grasp of English became much better by about 11.
Okay.
11, so 10, 11, I think. So there was it was just a culture shock, really. So yeah, and I don't recall much of it. I wonder how much of it I have blocked out. But I remember being very, very studious. So yeah, so that's about it, really. So my journey here, I just remember there was we weren't very welcomed. We had eggs thrown at our walls, and we always felt intimidated. And whenever we were playing out in the streets, when it was much safer then, even then, when people passed by, we would stop and playing and just become really quiet and timid just to avoid sort of conflicts and things like that. So
Right.
very, very different nowadays.
Sure. Wow. No, and I recognize you just kind of summarized a huge chunk of your life in like this much time, but it's still good to kind of hear
Mm,
your side of things, especially for those of you who are out there. I'm in the United States, so I love
mm,
connecting with people globally, but to kind of hear some of those things happen here as well. So it's just
mm,
interesting to see the parallels in other countries. I'm really curious to know. So the area where I live in is heavily populated with Koreans. And I went to high school with a lot of Koreans, and I know at least in the Korean culture, learning disabilities, like you don't talk about it, it doesn't really exist. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, being half Vietnamese and Chinese, what were learning disabilities seen as? Was it a stigma? What were there resources? Did your parents ever talk about those
No,
students?
I think with the Chinese culture, it's really strange. It was always, you've got to be the best. You know, it wasn't, okay, a pass is okay. If you got an A, that's fine. But if there was an option of A star, which there is nowadays, it's you come home, I got an A, mum. Why didn't you get an A star? It was
Right.
just instilled. I think it's very cultural. So there wasn't any discussion of learning disabilities at all, because I don't know whether they thought it never existed or it never came to mind, because parents just pushed us. I mean, there was high expectations. I don't feel I was pushed as much, but it was always an expectation that you worked hard and you studied hard, which I did to a certain extent. Maybe that's probably why I caught up reasonably quickly. But it's definitely not talked about very much in the Chinese community. And even at medical school, out of about 6 or 7 out of about 450 medical students in my year were dyslexic or had some sort of accommodation for exams. And I was the only Oriental one there. Maybe it was like myself, it wasn't picked up, or just people just didn't think about it like I did. But generally, yeah, it's not really talked about, and I'm glad it is being promoted more, and people are being aware of it, because there's no reason why it can't be supported if you are diagnosed with dyslexia.
Right. And I also feel like, I always say, like, it's not, dyslexia doesn't discriminate against groups of people. And me being a Black educator, I want to bring awareness, especially in the BIPOC community, or the Black, Indigenous, and people of color, because it's not just a whitewash learning difference. There are people all over the world, and I'm
Yeah.
so excited to find your account,
Mm.
because I was like,
Oh.
yeah, I really was. I said, okay, so this is a woman of color, and she's not a Black woman, she's not a Hispanic woman. And then we, started chatting, and then seeing that you were a medical doctor, I said, that's also another kind of, not mind-boggling, but for some people that don't understand dyslexia, they're like, well, how did you progress, to become a medical doctor?
Mm.
So
Yeah. So, with the Asian Chinese Oriental community, although it wasn't talked about, I think the general population, the statistics say that it's anything about 5% of the population are dyslexic, and I just wonder whether it's because that's the numbers who are diagnosed. But in Singapore, they have a equivalent of the British Dyslexia Association, and they put the value at 10%. And I
really,
just wonder whether the aspect of the Chinese characters, because when we arrived in the UK, our father made us go to Chinese school on Saturdays, and they were the beautiful Chinese characters, and I loved those. Although I hated getting up on a Saturday morning and being walked to school by the headmaster who lived nearby, so there was no skiving. The character was very pictorial, so I
right.
found it easier. So maybe there's an aspect of that, because it's very pictorial. The Chinese language is, even Koreans and things like that. I just wonder whether that had an impact on people not being picked up. But definitely. I just think I've lost my train of thought. What were you asking me about the?
No. I think I was just saying in general. I personally felt like, because I started my career in a private dyslexic school, and there were mostly white students there.
Amazing,
Right.
yeah.
And so over time, I was like, well, aren't there Black students that are dyslexic? And now that I'm more entrenched in just understanding more about dyslexia, I'm like, well, what
Mm.
about Japanese folks, Korean folks, Vietnamese? I
Mm.
mean, it really was like, hold on a second, it can't just be two types of people. So that's kind of where my
Yeah,
my
yeah.
thought process went with
Yeah, it definitely doesn't discriminate, and because of the culture, I think I remember my friend telling me about a friend of hers whose parents were worried about their child's development, and it turned out they were dyslexic, and they were devastated, and that was a bit mind-boggling, because there was so little understanding. They thought it was a disease of some kind, that will hinder them, and it means that their life isn't going to be as fulfilling or something. I don't know what they were thinking.
right.
But platforms like yours and mine, I hope to change all that, because it's a learning difference, and it's a learning difficulty because of the way the system has been set up.
Right.
When you think of centuries ago, everything was apprenticeship. There was no, very manual if you didn't know how to do it. and it wasn't everything on pen and paper. I mean, I'll talk a bit later about the academic side, passing exams and things like that. But medicine is, although you need to know the knowledge, it is a very practical, practical career. And some of the sort of historically more difficult courses, such as sort of technology, science, and engineering. You know, I also did an engineering degree as well. So everything that's pushed against dyslexia, which I shouldn't be doing, I did. And even in the engineering degree I did, there were a lot of dyslexics, and probably more than at medical school, which was really nice to see.
Right. So let's touch on that. Well, actually, before that, I want you to share with the audience, because we had a little bit of a conversation about this. In the United States, we say the Asian community, and we think of, like I said, like Koreans, Chinese people. So, but you said in the UK, it's called Oriental people. Can you explain?
It's more Oriental, yes, because when they say Asian here, it's defined as someone who's more Indian, Bangladeshi. But because I know so many Americans, instinctively I understand what they're saying. But for me, being Asian just means sort of you're in that sort of continent, which includes the Orientals, the Koreans, and the Indians. So I have a lot. So I love London for what it is, because we have that culture. It's so multiracial. Which I love. Yeah.
No, I just wanted the audience to hear that, because I knew you were talking about that. I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, to the Asian community. So thank you for sharing that. So let's talk a little bit about your experience in medical school. When were you diagnosed? I think you said your second year of medical school.
Yes, it was the second year.
Yeah,
yes.
About that.
I always did reasonably well academically. So even at sort of high school, I'd say it was equivalent of, we did our GCSEs. I did really well. I got 11 GCSEs. Most people take 9. I got A's. So I was pretty high flying then. But then I went into sort of A levels, and it was such a big jump. And the intensity was so much that I actually gave up. I just couldn't cope. I was also working as well, so I'm not sure how much that played in it, but I just found it too much. But so I went back to college, and for a number of reasons, because I thought life's too short. I really wanted to be a forensic pathologist. To be a forensic pathologist, you have to be a doctor. So that was the aim initially. So I went to college. I got rejected from all my medical schools. When I got my marks, I called them all back, and eventually one of the universities interviewed me, and I thought, I've done my best. You know, you can't do any more than that. I had a backup plan in my background, and a backup plan was to do biomedical engineering and then sort of apply as a graduate. But luckily, I didn't have to do that. So I got into medical school, did reasonably well, passed my exams, but I really, really struggled. And I put it down to the fact that I was working.
Right.
I had a very young son. I had a 4-year-old son.
Your mom.
Yeah. So it was different. So I wasn't sure whether I wasn't putting enough hours in, because of the time. And in the end, I spoke to a fellow student, and I asked her about a chapter that we were asked to read, and she goes, "Oh yeah, no, I understand it. It took me an hour." I said, "It took you an hour? It took me 5 hours, and I still didn't. None of it sunk in." I think that's when the alarm bells went. So we were very fortunate. We had a studies tutor. So I approached her, and she gave me a screening tool. She goes, "Oh, there's an indication that you are dyslexic." Unfortunately for me, the student finance fund those sort of things. So I was assessed, and it turned out I was dyslexic. So I was, but ironically, my maths was really good. I studied up to nearly degree level. My spelling was assessed in the dyslexia assessment as in being in the top 2% of the population, which is historically troublesome for dyslexics. So the maths and the English was very good. But in other skills, like short-term memory, was atrocious. I was in the bottom 5%. So
wow. Okay.
And there was such a huge disparity between the skills, and that's what got me through, because I was compensating and not realizing it, and I just worked so much more hours to understand what other people were understanding. If I understood it at all, I was like a duck in the water, where on the top surface, I looked all right, but my feet was going like this. So,
Right.
yeah. So, yeah, and I don't know. I think you're going to ask me about how I coped with that. So that was one of the questions that you were going to ask me. And I wasn't sure whether it was a relief or it was a bit of a shock, definitely.
Right.
Because I just never thought about it. Even when she said you might be dyslexic, I didn't understand it. I didn't think. I just carried on with my studies and waited for assessment. And I thought, what do I do with this?
Right. What do
You
I
know?
do? Like this
Yeah, exactly. And then it became a crutch. So, and I made excuses for myself, really. Oh, it's because I'm dyslexic. Oh, and for years, even up until I was beyond a doctor, it became an excuse for me. This is why I'm not doing very well. Oh, I can't cope with this. This is this. And, but at the end of the day, the deadlines and assignments and stuff had to be done. So I would just study. Sometimes I would do 24 hours and not go to sleep and hand in an assignment. Sometimes I'd do that. And studying before an exam, oh my gosh, I'd have like 1 or 2 hours sleep. But that was the way I was coping, even up until I graduated at times. But I got better towards the end, leaving the last minute. I don't advise anyone to leave things to the last minute, but that's how I discovered. So I try to plan ahead. I like to know details. But with medicine, you have to build the foundation and do the basics. But the basics, I didn't get it because I needed the bigger picture. I'd like to see the whole, and you can't do that with medicine, not really, because there's so much of it. You can take medicine to PhD level and still not understand it. So that was a huge challenge. Fortunately, the student finance did fund a tutor, but because the course was so intensive, it was trying to fit it in and having to take time out of the studies. So after the tutorial sessions, I didn't have that break to practice or put into practice what she suggested. And what they suggest is not always suitable for you. It's suggestion. Everyone is different. And even now, I'm still learning how to be a better dyslexic, as it were. So, yeah.
Wow. So that can sound really scary. I mean, just kind of the way that you described, I had a roommate I lived with about 10 years ago. She was in medical school, and so I just saw kind of the hell she was put through with medical school and staying up studying and the rotations. And so I couldn't imagine being dyslexic on top of that. And then also you didn't have those resources to know that before going into medical school. So you clearly were a very hard worker, incredibly smart, just didn't realize that was what was going on. So my question to you too, going back to when you were 11, I think, when you were in the ESOL classes, did it kind of click? Did you kind of think back to when you were younger, thinking like, maybe it wasn't just the ESOL classes, maybe there were some other things that made it more comfortable?
No, I didn't think of dyslexia or learning difficulty. I just thought it was a language barrier, because I didn't know the language. And to be honest, I didn't actually struggle with the schooling as such, because I always did very, very well. I think I just enjoyed reading, and that probably helped with my spelling, I think. So whether my spelling would have been bad if I didn't love reading so much. But I did it as a form of escapism. I just love books. I just ate them. I was named Bookworm of the Year at elementary school.
That's so, see, and I love hearing these stories because I feel like, when you've met one dyslexic, you've met one dyslexic. I've taught students with dyslexia and they're learning to read. And I don't think a lot of them will say like, I loved reading. So it's really interesting hearing your story and then also hearing how you coped. So I want to lead us to our next question. What advice would you give to adults, but more so adults that are in like the professional schooling? So maybe they're working on their PhD, maybe they're working on their medical degree, those really challenging, that challenging journey of being an engineer, a medical doctor, like, and they're dyslexic, or have a language learning difference. What advice would you give them?
Definitely see it as a possibility, as a possible diagnosis. Even at a late stage, I'm getting sort of contacts from medical doctors who are possibly being diagnosed at the age of 50. So then compensatory mechanism has been so good, it's gotten them through. But then something happens and they think, why, why am I struggling? And they are subsequently diagnosed with dyslexia. The best advice I can give you is definitely approach the university. There is support for that. I mean, you pay for a lot of fees and stuff, and there's usually a department that organises that. And you can always screen yourself online. There's lots of screening tools. There's a screening tool at the British Dyslexia Association. There must be one equivalent in other countries as well, but you can use that, and that will give you an indication. I did speak to a student who, a GP trainee, who thought she might be dyslexic, because they generally, which is really good, they generally put you forward for dyslexia assessment and fund it if you've struggled with your written exams.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it's quite sad they have to wait until you have several failures before they do that. So there's a possibility of you funding it yourself as well, if that's an option. That's the way forward, really, because there's lots of study support at universities. There's funding you can apply for. So I definitely see it as a possibility. And even if you don't, at least you know, and then maybe think of study strategies. Approach people who've gone through it. There's so many people on my followers who have so many different varied careers, sort of medicine, engineering. I'm on LinkedIn. When I so I keep in contact with my engineering cohort of students, and there was a number of them who were dyslexics, who are dyslexic. And it's worth reaching out. You'd be surprised. I mean, I do a lot of free guidance and telephone calls, and why not? Why do you have to struggle alone? And there's no shame in it. It's just who you are. And I think that's what people fear. They think, they're a bit embarrassed. Even in medicine, there's still quite a few people who don't want to talk about it. But it might be cultural in their family, so it's trying to change their way of thinking.
Right. And I think those are excellent pieces of advice to give. And I think that's why you and I have platforms like we do. So we bring that awareness. There is no shame. Let's educate. Let's have this community. Let's have conversations like this, because this is what we need to make that systemic change, not just in our country, but globally. And so I am so happy to have connected with you. You are a wealth of knowledge. You all in the audience would love to hear like a part 2, because I know, Van, you have a great story that we didn't really even tap into, but I see a lot of heart. So it seems like we might be able to do a part 2, and maybe we can even talk more in depth about your medical school experience with having dyslexia, because I know there are some folks that do come to my account asking for some advice about and I am not an adult with dyslexia. I always have to share that I struggled in school myself, but my neurodiverse learning difference was ADHD and anxiety. So that was partly why I went into special ed. And then I just started my career in a private dyslexic school. And then here we are 10 years later.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, because when I was a medical student, I was a private tutor, so a home tutor. And the students who came to me, I actually pushed them to get diagnosed, and they turned out to be dyslexic, dyspraxic. So being dyslexic doesn't make you any less ambitious. These people were going out of the way, paying for their own private tutoring, and they just thrive. They just need that little bit of support, that extra time to nurture what they have and overcome those barriers to become amazing people. Everyone can be amazing, but when you have dyslexia, that challenge just is a bit more difficult to overcome.
Right, exactly. Well, Van, thank you so much for your time, and we will definitely be in touch. And
definitely.
Yes, and I am going to post this IG live on my IGTV. So those of you who came in later, you will be able to watch it, rewatch it, share it with anyone who you feel needs to hear this, wants to understand. And don't forget to follow Van's account. It's _dyslexic_medic, correct?
Right.
Yes.
So I'm on Facebook as well. So, I'm happy to give advice. I don't charge anything. I do it on a volunteer basis because I love what I do and I like sort of supporting people. So do drop me a line if you need to.
Thank you so much, Van. And I hope you have a good rest of your evening.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to promote that, because I want more people to go into science, technology, engineering, medicine, and there's no reason why you can't if that's what you want to do. You just need to make that effort. Like anything in life, if you work hard, you'll get it. If you need that support, find it.
Right. I'm 100% there with you. All right, everyone. Well, we will
Thank you,